Welcome back to Cryptic Woodworks. Steve here. I thought you might like some other tips and tricks today for some of the pieces that I'm working on. So you might notice I've got all these little round bits here, centers drilled out. And these are the tubes that I was making in the previous video where I was on the lathe boring out these centers. But what I'm finding is that when I drilled them out, some of them are getting just a little too tight. So I have that going on, and I have the problem that since I drilled out the centers on these, occasionally they won't line up perfectly. I get a little bit of a gap in there, or one's a little higher than the other if the hole wasn't perfectly concentric. So I want to try to fix both of those. So the first step is to go ahead and sand out the center of these. I came up with a nice easy way to do that, so let's switch over to the drill press and I'll show you that. Alright, I'm back over here at the drill press, and I made this real simple little jig here that's just bolted down to my drill press table with the screws. Obviously you could do it with clamps, or if you had some T-slots in, you could attach it that way. And all it is I have a sanding spindle attached to my drill press, and I'm able to drop that into the hole so that when I'm sanding one of these pieces, I can keep the piece nice and flat as I sand around it. And since I don't have a spindle sander, I can even use this as sort of a poor man's spindle sander as it's spinning. So let me grab one of the unsanded ones and I'll show you how that works. I just turn it on. And say with the quill, I can just sand that real lightly, and I don't need to take a lot off. And then if I'm worried about my table not being dead on square, I can even come in from the other side and do a couple of passes. And then I can drop it onto the piece and test it. And this now slides pretty easily, so I know that's good. So the next piece to take care of is how we get them all perfectly concentric. Let me just finish these up and then we'll switch to the next stage. Alright, I've sanded the pieces all up so they can slide onto the tube much more nicely. As I said, occasionally as I rotate some of these, depending on how well I did, and it's a little hard to see, but there is a little bit of a step here, and I like to try to make all of them about as concentric as I can. So the question is, how do I kind of try to make all these concentric? Well, we're going to switch back to the lathe for that, but first we have to make a way to actually hold them on the lathe. So I picked up a piece of 5/8 inch all thread. Since my holes in the center here are 5/8 inch. So I can drop all of these on here. I'll try to put that on without actually dropping it. And then I can grab 2 extra bolts. And I'm going to bolt these guys on. Just do a little bit of hand snug because I'm not doing anything crazy to get these guys nice and concentric. But there, this gives me a nice piece that I can now chuck into the jaws on my lathe and actually just do a real quick pass on this to try to make them all nice and concentric, along with a little bit of sanding while it's there. So let's switch over to the lathe and get this part done. Okay, we're back here at the lathe, and as you can see, I've already been working on some of these. I've got a lot of dust on it, but that's good. You know, I'm a shop that's actually doing things, not just making videos. So I'm going to take the piece that I bolted together, drop it into the chucks, tighten these guys down. So there, that's really in place. And now what I can do is grab my little turning tool, turn my lathe on. Now this is a fairly heavy piece, so I tend to like to run it pretty low. And all I have to do are take some really light passes. Because all I'm trying to do is bring these guys nice and concentric. And it depends on how far out they were when you started. Now, it may look like I'm taking a lot, but really that's very little. And if you don't have much to take off, you could even skip this part and just go right to some sandpaper. Which I'll do. So those should be pretty good. Now I'm just going to take a handy piece of some fine grit sandpaper sand these guys down. Like I say, if you didn't have much to take off, you could start with maybe a piece of 120 or 150 grit. You know, remove stock a little bit faster. For me, I'm just trying to make the pieces smooth at this point. It'll save me time later. All right, that should do it. Yeah, they're pretty decently smooth. So now I'll just take these out of the chuck. And now let's check them out over on the tube. Okay, last thing we're going to do is take the bolts off. That's good. We'll slide all these off. And now we can start putting them onto our tube. Everybody stay here. Trouble with round objects, they're always rolling away from you. These days I'm going to have to make something that's all square. And now I should be able to rotate these, and hopefully, I mean, I might still be just the tiniest bit off in some places, but, you know, my goal here is to be pretty darn close. If it's not dead on, you know, I'm still happy with that, because I do try to leave a little bit of play so they can turn easily once they're in place. So that finishes off this one. So I've just got 5 more sets to go. So I hope that helps you out with a couple of tips and tricks. Maybe it gives you an idea for one of your own projects. As always, stay dusty.